Hello, I'm going to talk to you quickly today about anxiety. It's another of these talks. We've just had a request to give an overview of how hypnotherapy deals with anxiety. There are many labels and definitions associated with the word anxiety, and that's one of the first things to point out. All the definitions clinically and in the vernacular, I-O-N-S, have I spelled that right? One more I. The labels, the words that are used in the vernacular, we talk about trepidation, worry, and so on. And these words have slightly different meaning for everybody, of course, as words are not a perfect form of communication of ideas. So when a person has anxiety, they may go to the physician and they will get some help there, hopefully. But what does hypnotherapy help them with? Well, it's a holistic therapy, and we call it a biopsychosocial, which is what medicine is supposed to be, but often struggles to deal with the psycho and the social, because the emphasis on giving a tablet, a treatment, something quick for people, which may be very helpful at the time. So there are so many things associated with fear that are really very cultural as well. What frightens people in some cultures is not the same as in others. It's how you're brought up as well. My mother was a worrier. I've learned to be a worrier as well. So the social factors come into it. And really that's not you at all. It's just the way you've been trained to become. And that can be retrained in your subconscious mind, which is exactly what hypnotherapy is about. Many people have had clinical therapy, and that includes all the standard CBT and so on, which can be helpful to them, counseling about their fears. They're told to face their fears and do things to help themselves build confidence. All well and good. Hypnotherapy being one of those treatments, of course. So let's look then quickly at some of the other aspects of this that we could look at, the main fears that people are bringing to us as therapists. Those fears include things like fear of illness, of death, of aging, of poverty. And then the more nebulous fears, fear of change, fear of the unknown. People have fear of success, fear of failure. And often at the deepest root of all of that is the fear of not feeling really worthy, of lovable. And so you can have fear, of course, leading all the way to panic when the body is so triggered by the mind and then goes in a loop. And we become more and more anxious, stressed and worried. So fear leading to stress reactions, and fear and depression often go together. About 25% of all GP appointments, fear and depression together are associated with this, the main symptoms people are bringing. And about 90% of people who have fear have depression and vice versa. Of course, fear can also be associated with anger. Our anger may be a reaction to things that we feel are threatening us and we can't cope. So we can get fear and depression about something internal we've been carrying for a long time and we don't even really understand. Or fear and depression about things we can't change in our life, my job, my marriage. And of course, we can get depressed about the fear, anxious about getting rid of the depression, and like many emotions, it builds up like a big, complicated sandwich of emotion. The goal of the therapy is to reprogram that. So really, in a sense, we're always tackling the fear by facing it. We go ahead in spite of the fear. The hero is not free from fear. The hero or heroine goes ahead in spite of the fear and eventually learns to understand and master it. So with fears, we can face them, understand them intellectually, at the deeper emotional levels and so on, right down to the negative fixed ideas maybe there, that deep intuitive level. So tackling the fear and then choosing to go towards courage. And so when we look at that, we have choice here. People often subconsciously choose to be frightened and anxious. There may be some secondary gains associated with it, or as I say, it may be just picked it up from somebody else. They haven't ever thought about it. They might say, well, it's my genes. Well, up here in the bio side of it, of course, genes play a role. Brain areas are involved, levels of adrenaline. We can go on and on about that and classifying all these different kinds of fears at the psychological level. what's separation anxiety about and how that affects people, often in their midlife. The problem occurred when they were younger, but then in relationships, when maybe the marriage is in trouble or breaking down, then they begin to experience very severe neediness, a great fear of being on their own. And so we see that those fears are really being triggered from an earlier time in life where that was set into the mind. So we can channel the mind into the positives, but we can also deal with the deeper roots. So programming, powerful, positive, good, specific programming that's very well tailored to the individual client can have amazingly beneficial effects, helping them to go from that fear polarity of the energy to courage, because everybody has both. It all depends on what you choose, consciously and subconsciously. So we have our conscious choice and our subconscious choice. It may be necessary to do some regression work to understand the deeper roots, what the fear represents. In the old psychodynamic therapy, it was said that, say, for example, a spider phobia, well, represented something maybe sexual the person wasn't facing. You don't have to accept that view, but sometimes the fear has deeper significance. That's true. And it may come from an earlier time in life that's triggering us now, and we haven't understood it. So we can go into that in depth in hypnotherapy, in a very brief form of therapy, and change the roots. Tackle those roots, change them, so we begin to liberate our confidence, our courage. So, fear of illness, aging, death, poverty, failure, success, and so on. We have to look into the ones that are the most powerfully undermining that person. And very often then there's that fear, as I said, of not being lovable, of not feeling worthy, and maybe the fear of separation, fearing that we need the approval of others. We always want to look good, sound good, and we have that so prevalent in our society. That's the social anxiety disorder, the most common form of fear, really. We have the panic disorders, with or without agoraphobia. I mentioned separation anxiety, and then the generalized anxiety disorder. Interestingly, for people 60 years upwards, that's usually the only main fear that afflicts them the most, apart from maybe worries about money and death and aging and so on, which can all be turned around into a positive, because we've got to take constructive action about the fears. Otherwise, the fear is the prison in which we create by giving in. It's almost a parasitic bully that lives on us, and we don't ever take the time to confront it, to understand it and confront it and get the kind of help that we really need to change that. So it is like a carriage we build. We put the horses onto it, it draws us to our execution, and we're the executioner. We're frightening ourselves, making funny, ugly faces in the mirror that terrify us. And we say, I have a fear of flying, but really what we're doing is I'm terrifying myself about planes, the false ideas, the catastrophizing, or whatever else that we may be saying to ourselves. So we have the power to change that. If you're saying that to yourself, you can say a different message. With therapy, we often get people to go into it in the Gestalt way. Be the fear, speak as the fear. What's it really saying? Well, that you have no abilities, that you won't be able to succeed. And so as we withdraw from our fear, we become very trapped, and we become the victim of the fear. Fear making us do things we don't want to do, making us avoid the things we really need to do. And very dangerously in life, the fear drawing us to the very thing we don't want. That great philosophical lesson from ancient writings, the book of Job, where it said, Lord, what I feared most has come upon me. Because what you're focusing on is what you're creating inside in your mind and body, eventually into your behavior and out into life. So we have to really understand the power of fear, that it can be so much about illusion. We do have the survival aspects of fear, fight, flight, freeze. That's the arousal and recognition of danger, responding to it. At the same time, very often those responses count against us because we're not taking control properly. Now, fear, as Jung said, often has within us the nucleus of desire. We're attracted to things that frighten us, as in a horror movie. There is that darker side to it. And really, we haven't time to go into those kind of mechanisms and discovering what that may be about in the individual. But people do become very trapped in fear. They do become addicted almost to it. and yet it has nothing to do with their true nature, their true power. So as we begin to make our choices and we get the very best therapy to help us put those choices into action, and we're choosing courage over fear, confidence over feelings of being weak and inadequate, we can begin to move forward. And that therapy will address the subconscious, not just the cognitive, conscious, intellectual levels alone. Because the problem, again, is so often is in those limbic areas. It's in deep in the emotional areas. That's where the feelings about yourself and about the problems have to be addressed. So with a good therapy, and that means you find the best therapist, the best training that they'll teach you, or you go on a course, as we often teach people with Hypnotherapy Training International, courses on stress management, management of anxiety, and so on. So you learn about the topic in proper depth, the psychological, biological, and social. I'm only touching some of the high points here. So all in all, when we realize the incredible damage fear can do to our lives, and when we can harness the positive side, the survival side, and change the personality of fear that many of us have, that character almost deficit of fear of rejection and failure to take action then because we're afraid of success or failure, and becoming very dependent then and weak in life, we never have the life we could have had. And that's a great tragedy. To really, when if we're able to turn around at the end of our lives and could look on ourselves, look back and see how much of it was we were frightened of bogeymen, of really unreal, almost childish fears. If we can tackle them now while we're alive, free ourselves of those burdens of fears, we have a very different outcome for ourselves and our lives. So I hope you've just got at least a very few key points here that you would then want to follow up on and find yourself a good therapist and get on with it and become from fear to courage. I hope you'll listen to our next broadcast in a few days, and thank you very much for listening.